Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I see we've already got quite a few people watching live. Everybody, remember if there's someone that you think would benefit from hearing this conversation, you'll be able to share these same links afterwards. And we're going to leave the recording up. We think this is a really important conversation for all of us to share right now. So I'm pretty sure everyone already is familiar with you, but I just want to give a little bit of a rundown why today's guest is the person that I thought would be best to help us navigate today's conversation. I saw that you posted a really well thought out, clearly expressed message. I think it's been about a week ago
hmm
about how you felt affected by current events and how bias affects us as a country and as smaller communities. And with your extensive background in motivational speaking and training teams and lifting people up, I thought, who better to reach out to than you? And also, being a Black man working in school nutrition is also unique. So, added to all your other extensive work experience, you have that extra bit of insight or that different lens that you're seeing all of this through.
Yeah.
And you're also super chill. And I said, that's who we need to bring in to this
You're too
conversation.
kind.
I said, because I've been really struggling with managing the stress around current events. COVID was already kind of beating the life out of us.
Yeah, yeah,
And then on top of this, another layer of stress. So, of course, what I want for everyone is for them to be as effective as possible in their jobs. Our mission is to feed children, to fuel the future.
hmm
But if we're operating under unconscious bias, we could damage the children that we come into contact with, and nobody wants that.
right.
So I think this is such an important conversation to have.
Absolutely. Uh-huh. Well, thank you for having me. I'm pretty excited and honored by being asked and looking forward to just jumping in and engaging in the conversation.
Yes. And so you already have done a lot of research prior to this point around bias. And so you were prepared to give this presentation or something similar this year before COVID. Is that right?
Right. I was actually slated with a colleague of mine to do a keynote address or one of the breakouts at ANC in Nashville, basically on bias and diversity. So we've been working on that. We had many plans of things that we wanted to do, and so we were pretty excited about it. But when COVID happened, all of that kind of went away. I was also actually planning working with a local system that's having some problems with, let's call it cultural sensitivity. And so they were talking to me about coming in and just sharing with their team some things that they could do to try to address what's going on. So that's kind of how I got started. I've always been very intrigued with race relations and all of that. Being a Black man, and I'm usually in the minority in every place that I've worked. So it's always been something that I was interested in, but it was just kind of like the timing just kind of all came together. And when all of the things just kind of spun out of control with the death of George Floyd, it was kind of timely. So
Right.
here we are.
Here we are. So I'm going to put your presentation up. At least I believe I'm going to. All of these are new toys. I love new technology when it cooperates,
When
as
it
most
cooperates.
people do, right? So, all right, here we go. Awesome.
Awesome. Well, when we talk about bias and blind spots, and we're going to open it up. I want to have some interaction with the audience if they're out there. But when we hear the term bias, bias has a very negative connotation. But what I want people to understand is all a bias is it's a preference. You have a preference of one thing over another. But before we get into it, I just want to kind of see if I can demystify the term. So If you can show the first slide. And what I want to ask the audience is this. These are real people with the Cincinnati Ballet. 5 of these people are biological mothers, but they all have children. How is that possible? I want to give just a couple minutes to give people a chance to think about how is it possible that we have 7 dancers, but only 5 of them are biological mothers, but they all have children.
So I can see your comments on YouTube and on Facebook. If anyone has an idea, I'm so glad that people are participating and they've registered so we can see their names. So hello to Joanne and Swarthy Daisy and Jeremy. So now that we've had a moment to think about it, no comments specifically about how that could be possible just yet. Let's move to the next slide.
I'm going to tell you the reason why we do that, and it's okay. How are we have 7 dancers but only 5 biological mothers? It's because they're 7 dancers, but 2 of them are men. Now, when you think about what went through your mind, some of you probably thought they're adoptive mothers, or some of you, who knows what you assumed, but how many of you thought that 2 of the dancers were actually male?
Thank you, everyone, for continuing to participate. Yes, Cindy, that was my assumption too. Didn't even occur to me that not all dancers are female.
We have these ideas and these concepts because we see the world as we are, not as the world is. I wanted to go ahead and share the next slide. Okay. Now, this is one of my favorites. Next, I'm going to show you a picture of 2 beautiful brunettes helping each other apply makeup for an important date. Now, I kind of already got you guys on edge because you know I'm going to throw you a curveball. But picture in your mind what these 2 beautiful brunettes that are helping each other apply makeup looks like. What does it look like in your mind's eye? And you can go ahead and show the next slide. Bam! 2 beautiful brunettes. I think they're beautiful. 2 beautiful brunettes applying makeup for an important date. Now, I don't know what these 2 ladies are preparing for, but it looks like it's pretty important to me how meticulous they are with the makeup. Problem is that we see with the bias, all the biases is really just a preference that you have. You prefer Pepsi over Coke. Some people prefer tea to coffee. Some people prefer blondes over brunettes. I remember growing up as a child in the 70s that everybody remembers Charlie's Angels. Well, most of America was going crazy and thought that Farrah Fawcett was everything. But Farrah Fawcett didn't do it for me and my friends. Jacqueline Smith could have got all of my lunch money. I mean, when I say all, she could have got all my lunch money. She's 70-something years old. She could probably get my lunch money right now. I was biased because I have a bias towards dark hair versus lighter hair. Not to say that anything's wrong with blondes, but that's what the bias is. But the problem with the bias is when the bias turns into a blind spot. And that can happen to an individual and it can happen to an organization. The thing about a blind spot is if you've been driving and you realize you have a blind spot is that's an area that you can't see. You don't know that you have a blind spot in that area because we see the world as it is, as we see it, not as the world actually is, because we all have this filter that we see the world through. I have some colleagues and it's a predominant, obviously I'm in school nutrition. I work as a nutrition coordinator. My colleagues often would tell me, Irvin, you need to think like a woman. When I'm supervising, she said, you can't think like a man, you have to think like a woman. Well, I've been a woman exactly 0 days in my life. I have exactly 0 experience thinking like a woman. And I recently had this conversation with my colleague and I told her, I said, look, stop telling me to think like a woman because I've been thinking like a man my entire life. If you want me to think like a woman, then tell me what to think. I understood what she was attempting to tell me was genders tend to have certain behaviors, but the point was I don't have any insight into how to think that way because I've never even been in that situation. And a lot of times, because we think that the world sees things the way that we see things, we can be off because the only perspective we have is our perspective. And if some people have seen me do training before, and when I'm talking about training about how you or your knowledge and I tell people often that you really don't know enough to really know, you don't know everything there is to know about a situation. And the example I use in school nutrition, because it's predominantly women, is this. I say, I have two sons that I love tremendously. I was blessed to be in the labor room when both of them were born. One was born naturally, one was born with a C-section. So because I was in the room, in the labor room for the entire birth, I think I understand what it's like to have a baby. And they all look at me with that, that's the look that I'm looking for. That exact same look of, you don't have a clue what it's like to have a baby.
Right.
Well, that's the same thing that comes when it comes to different people and biases, because you have a blind spot because you don't know. You can only base it off of what your experience. And that blind spot can cause you to ignore a group of people and not even realize that you're treating them differently or that you're doing anything or offending anyone.
Right.
And it goes deep. So
it could absolutely be unintentional, and anyone can do it. This isn't reserved for one group of people. So I like the way you explain that.
The thing about bias and opinions is that everybody's opinion is 100% perfect, makes it 100% perfect sense to them. But many times it doesn't make any sense to the people that they're talking to. If anybody has a teenager, especially a teenage boy, they can come up with some creative things that make perfect sense to them, but doesn't make any sense to anyone else. And the same thing applies when we talk about a bias, because everyone believes that the way I see the world and the way that I believe and what I feel is how everybody feels or should feel. And that is definitely not the case, because we all, when we're looking for whether we're right, everybody wants to be right, and we look to be right, and there's this thing in our thinking, and it happens automatically. It's called confirmation bias. And what confirmation bias is this: if somebody told you that you were going to see a comedian, and this comedian is the funniest comedian you've ever seen in your life, and you trust that source, then you're going to actually look for ways to confirm what you were going in already believing, that this person is an incredible comedian. Or if you go to see somebody and they say, this person is terrible, he absolutely sucks, then you will look for ways to confirm what you already believe. Same thing plays out all the time especially in today, what's going on, because America has gotten so polarized that we look for, especially when we go to the news, and I hear a lot of people saying the news media, the left-wing media, right-wing media, and all that, it all has the same goal, and that's to make money. So that's my personal opinion about news, is news companies are here to make money. But we believe what we want to believe. So whatever your political slant, you will look for things that confirm what you already believe. Very few people will go out there and try to find something to disprove what they and their friends actually believe and what they talk about. And they'll share examples of between each other. And I've seen it on both sides. Me, when it comes to watching news, I do my best to try to watch all the different sides of the news, even news that's going on over in Europe. And it's so interesting that the different stories, the same story can have 5 or 6 different spins, because when we share and we give examples of what we believe and how we feel, our mind is drawn to look for things that will confirm what it is that we already beliefs. So if you want to fight bias, then you want to make sure that you, as a individual, that you try to make sure that you are paying attention to if you might be you might be looking to confirm what it is that you believe. Because if you can test it, look on your Facebook, look on your social media page, look at the things that you share. Do you ever share something that is contrary to what you believe? I definitely have, as a Black man, I definitely have a position in what's going on right now. And most of my friends post things that support the pain that we're feeling, or that re-emphasize the pain that we're feeling. But when I go to some other pages, I see them posting things that support what they believe. This is one of the problems that I found, and we can talk about this when we talk about dialogue. But we really should start with where we are when it talks to having a conversation or dialogue. We really should start off with where we are and be aware that our own bias and our own blind spots, our own bias and blind spots can keep us from being effective in the job that we're doing and in the relationships that we're having. And the thing that you got to remember about a blind spot is you don't know you have a blind spot. If somebody doesn't tell you that you might have a blind spot and you're open to hear and receive it, you won't ever know that you have a blind spot.
How do you know whether or not your organization has a problem with bias? So that was a great example, looking at your Facebook and seeing if it's become an echo chamber. Does everybody agree with you? How would you be able to identify that in an organization? And beyond Facebook, how do you identify it in yourself? Let's pretend that you still have people in your life that have a lot of different kinds of opinions. How do we find where we have that bias? When you put that image up at the beginning, I definitely couldn't figure out how two of those sets of legs didn't belong to someone who was a biological mother. But it's not every day that somebody calls you out on your bias or puts up a mirror to your bias. How do you find it on your own?
You really can't. I don't believe you can find a bias on your own. If you're biased, until somebody shines the light on it, you'll walk around, and it's like this. If you love coffee and you've never had a good cup of tea, you would never realize that you are biased against tea. The only way you can know that you have a preference for one thing or another is when you're confronted with a choice. And this is a thing that happens in organizations. I need to make sure that the audience understands that biases are part of our nature as human beings. It's a part of being human. The problem is when the bias becomes a problem where you are unfairly for or unfairly against a group of people. You establish stereotypes that take place and you don't realize that it's happening. So I see some of the comments that said, that's why I can't do Facebook or Twitter anymore. There's really some value in that. But when you I think somebody talked about self-inventory. The only real way that I believe that you can identify your bias is to have an honest conversation with somebody who is different who has a different opinion about what it is that you're talking about. Right now, because of all the race relations, you have this group of people that believe that Black Lives Matter. And to say the opposite of Black Lives Matter, they say either Blue Lives Matter or All Lives Matter. And that's an inherent right built in there. It's just built to be a conflict. And we have to just make sure that we're open to recognize that maybe I do have a blind spot, because I'm a Black man. So saying Black Lives Matter, I'm personally vested in that. I understand that when you say Black Lives Matter, it doesn't mean that no other lives matter. It means that right now Black lives are being they're being black men and black women are being killed by not only police officers but just average everyday citizens, and it seems to be no justice. So it's not saying that that's the same as not happening to other people, that the police are only killing black people, but it just seems to be within the black
Disproportionate.
community because it
Right.
happens so frequently. That's something to us. Now, do I have a bias and do I have a blind spot on that? Yeah, I do. And in order to try to combat it, I will talk to and engage someone in a dialogue to see if maybe I have missed it. And in an organization, how do you combat it in an organization? You've got to have some different voices at the table. If everybody at the table is saying the same thing, if you all go to the same restaurants, you all go to watch the same movies, you all vote for the same political candidate, you all attend the same church, guess what? You're going to tend to have the same type of thinking, the same type of value system. And that's very good, Vanessa, that about the situations can confirm biases, because when you're in an organization and you have to be open, you really have to be open to hear, man, I might not totally have it right.
I think because our experiences affect how we see everything, our past experiences.
Hmm.
And sometimes because you spend a lot of time with people with a similar experience, you start to assume that everybody knows where you're coming from. So, right, when I hear the term Black Lives Matter, nothing in me reacts to that. It's like, yes, of course they should. But my entire life, I've seen that people can kill people of color, especially Black people, with impunity, not just here, but lots of places.
Hmm.
And so when I hear that, of course, it doesn't trouble me. I don't question it in any way. I totally understand why that has to be stated. And then when I hear other people assuming that that means other lives are not important, you have to remember that the lens that you see the world through is not ubiquitous, and maybe that person hasn't had an experience that would help them understand that instantly the way that you do.
Right.
And only now that people are able to record all these examples of racism does it feel like people who aren't directly affected by this are getting hip to it. Of course, I already knew this was happening. This is just life as I know it. And I was born in the 80s. It's not like I was around in the 60s during the civil rights movement. But after that, things don't change overnight. You can't legislate righteousness, essentially. Like, you
Right.
can't force people to do right. You can't force people to be kind. Just because you change a law doesn't mean everybody's mindset has changed. And so logically, we should know that these problems didn't go away overnight. But no one was recording it. And oftentimes, because of our culture here in the United States as Americans, when somebody marginalized speaks up about their experience, people gaslight them, meaning they say, oh, you didn't see what you think you saw. Oh, are you sure that's what it was about? So people have been saying this is a problem, but no one's been listening. Now that we have the technology to show people that this is a problem, now a lot of people are really hearing this for the first time. So some people that feel so distressed by this because they've been dealing with this their entire life are being put off by people who are reacting to this as though it's brand new, but it is brand new to them. So this is a massive opportunity for growth and learning to communicate effectively with other people, and learning that you cannot assume anything about what someone knows going into a conversation. So you may take something the wrong way, assuming, well, they're saying this to be nasty, they're saying this to be hateful. But if they don't have access to the information that you have access to, you can't necessarily make those assumptions.
Right.
So it's very tricky.
And I will just share this with you. I have some good friends of mine. I came out of the restaurant industry, And I was sharing this with some friends of mine just last week. And this is, we'll call it a short story. I said the last time I went out to eat with my white friends, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I have two male white colleagues that are great guys, and we worked in the restaurant industry, and we were good friends. And we all left that company and went to work for another company. And at the time, we were working in Alpharetta, Georgia, and I don't know where people are dialing in from, but in Alpharetta, it's a more affluent area in the Metro Atlanta area, predominantly white, and just it's a ritzy. There's a lot of money up there, and so our office was in Alpharetta. And these two guys, they asked me, say, "Hey, Irv, you want to go out for lunch?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So I jumped in the car, and this is in the year 2001, and that was 19 years ago. 2001, they asked me if I wanted to go out to lunch. I said, yeah. So I hopped in the back seat with them, thought nothing of it. We're driving in Alpharetta, and we're stopped at a stoplight. I'm in the back seat, and the guy in the front seat, a police officer, came out and went in front of us and turned and went that way. And he just was sitting in the driver's seat, and he glared at the police officer. He's like, and I was in the back seat. I said, "Man, what are you doing?" He's like, "I hate cops. I just can't stand them." And he didn't realize I was in the back seat freaking out. I said, "Don't you ever do that with me in the car. I would never, ever trust you to put me in this situation." He thought I had lost my mind. I said, because what's going to happen is when those cops come and pull this car over and they see the two of you and me in the back seat, I'm going to be face down. I need to go home to my wife. I need to go home alive. Don't do that with me in the car. That was the last time that I went and got in the car with my white colleagues for lunch, because they didn't understand the lens that I was coming from, or that I had, what experiences that I had. They had no filter to actually understand it. And I don't blame them, but it still can't stop me from I'm in survival mode. So when we start talking about changing things within our country and within our organizations, we have to really take an honest inventory. And the truth of the matter is, if you really boil it down to the simplest terms, it's a matter of the heart. We can write all kinds of laws, all kinds of legislation. We can write everything on the books. But if a person doesn't want to change their heart, if their heart is evil, if their heart is wicked, if there's nothing you can do to change that. And that's not my desire to change it. My mentor taught me many years ago, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. If you make somebody believe something, they don't really believe it. What you're doing is you're making them accept it by power and domination. And we already have proven that just dominating somebody does not produce cooperation. It produces compliance. And there's a difference between cooperation and compliance. One of the things that I also wanted to talk about when we talk about bias is we all have them. The goal, or where we want to get to, is a place where they don't stifle our individual growth, or our organizational growth, or our growth as a country. Because I love being an American. I'm a veteran. I stand for the pledge, but I also support those that want to protest by kneeling, because I understand the reason why. But we seem polarized by this, because I think everybody would agree that it's not right to take a human life, but we tend to, in America, we tend to be, and I think even our company, our organizations, our school nutrition departments can be polarized, because so many times we focus on the what. And I think Simon Sinek does what's called the golden circle. We focus on the what and the how, but we don't ask why. if you get to the reason why something happened, or why they ask why people are rioting and looting. And I don't support rioting and looting, but I do support protest. But if you beat somebody down for so long, sometimes the way they respond, the what they do or the how they do it makes no rational sense. But they've been disenfranchised for so long that it's something that just happens. I was on a podcast last week, and I didn't mean to share, and I hope no one's offended by this example, but the example that I gave, and somebody shared with me that it was a powerful example, was Lorena Bobbitt. Now, how does Lorena Bobbitt fit in this conversation? Lorena Bobbitt did a heinous thing to her husband, but how long was she beaten down? How long had she been abused? And when you do that to a person or a group of people for a prolonged period of time, and anger gets built up and it gets repressed, it's going to spill out. And it happens in our teams and in our organizations. So how do we get to the place where we can be open and receive what people are saying? Because what she did was terrible. But why she did it, she saw that she had no other recourse. And many times the people on our teams and in our organizations, if our organizations are built on bias or I shouldn't say built on bias, but if bias is a part of our culture, then there's a whole group of people that have a feeling and something is going on within them that you have no clue. And if you found out about it, you would, as the organizational leader, you would be up in arms. Oh my God, how did this happen? And it happened because we have these blind spots, and you don't realize. We talk about bias and diversity, but organizations are always trying to be diverse. But what is diversity? What do people really see diversity as being? Many times they think diversity is just, let's have a multicultural group of people, and now we're diverse because we have a bunch of different people. Having a bunch of different people is not diversity. People from Indian, Hispanic, Black, white, male, female, different genders, different sexual orientations, just having them on one team does not make you diverse. But when you appreciate the things that make you diverse, and by valuing the things that make you diverse, that's how true diversity comes into play. Because we are biased. We are biased by nature. You might be interested to find out that neuroscientists have found that the bias resides, or the tendency to be biased resides in our brain. And it's an automatic thing. It resides in an area of the brain called the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system. And the thing that happens is, because it's part of the limbic system, that's where our emotions take place. And it's the subconscious. It happens like that. It happens before you can think about it. When people are surprised that they have a biased opinion, or surprised when they find out that people think they feel a certain way about them, many times it's because your subconscious reacts way before your conscious mind has a chance to catch up. You subconsciously have a bias, or a stereotype, or an aversion, or a dislike of a person because they're different from you. And your body language or your facial expression says it right away. Because we all walked in, and we've seen somebody come in and you just knew right off the bat that they couldn't stand the ground that you walked in. I know some people right now, when I walk in, and I know that you despise me and you don't like me. That's okay. You might afterwards, by the time your conscious mind realizes that your subconscious mind is frowning, your conscious mind says, oh, the politically correct thing to do right now is smile and say, hey, how you doing, Irvin? That's not diversity. That's not honesty. But it's part of all of who we are. So it comes from us being really, really, really honest with ourselves. I wasn't even sure if I was going to share this piece, but I feel like maybe it's appropriate. But I realized when I started doing the research for ANC, and I was again looking at myself, I realized that I have a bias. I have a bias against white men that are in my peer group. Not that I don't like you, but I have a bias. I have an assumption that I assume about white men. And I assume that white men, and please, if you're a white man out there, just please um, put a pin in that question right there so we can go back to it, okay? But I assume that white men, when they're not in my presence, that they tell racial jokes, that they have very racially tense conversations, and they really have something, a hidden agenda when they're not in my presence. They might smile in my face, but they might look different. It looks different behind me. And I started asking myself, where did this come from? I wasn't raised like that. My parents really raised me. Grew up in a Christian home. We loved Jesus, and we were we were taught to accept all men. So when I started examining how did I get there, and I didn't realize this, I was in my 50s when I really realized that. There was a 5-year window from 1981 to like 1986 that I had 3 particular things that happened with white men that were close to me. The first one in ninth grade, doing yearbook at the end of the year, my first year at the school in the suburbs, and this guy, I'm not going to give his name, but he wrote in my yearbook, "Irvin, you're a loudmouth." He said a homophobic slur, and then he said something nigger, and he wrote that in my yearbook. And it took me by surprise. I was like, what? Where did this come from? 2-3 years later, the star of our basketball team was talking, and he used a racial slur directed at me, called me a jigaboo. Like, I didn't even know, I'm up north. I didn't know what a jigaboo was. I had no clue. Imagine me, he said that, I was like, oh, okay, all right, pass the soap. And I kept it rolling. And the last one was in my freshman year of college, guy that I used to play basketball with. And he thought it was really funny. And I was up at the campus pub at Halloween, and he came and stood next to me, and he was dressed in a full, authentic, the real linen Klan uniform. And he came and stood next to me with his arms folded and started smiling and laughing. And I was incensed. And I didn't swing on him because I was the only black. I went to a small school in upstate New York. I was one of 2 African Americans there. They had 2 other black students that were exchange students from Africa. So it was 2 African American men there. So I didn't feel like my rage was allowed to explode onto him. But from that time, I realized that over time I had developed this. Now I'm glad that I realize it, because now I can consciously try to make sure that I'm not projecting that on people. But that's the very real thing that we're dealing with, is the people's bias and how it can have an effect on the people around us. But I realized that it was not necessary. It was directed at me, but it really wasn't about me. But it took years of going through this to really, really realize that. So when you see me today, and when that post that I posted, was it rare than a unicorn? I'm a black man in school nutrition. Those are just 3-4 experiences that I carry with me all the time, that have me looking through life with a different lens. And I realize that I have these biases, but because I'm aware of these biases, I can work to try to counteract them. I know they're not the way they're supposed to be, so I can consciously work to counteract them. But the challenge is to those who are there, what are you doing with the biases that you might have? I think I got you off mute.
Yes, that all makes so much sense. It's hard to let go of a bad experience, and it's the way our brain is wired. When you have a negative experience, it historically would have made more sense for you to retain that information
Mhm.
than positive information. In order to survive, you need to remember every risky situation you come across
Mhm.
to keep yourself safe. So, this is a natural human tendency. When something negative happens to you, it's embedded in your mind, and it may make you irrational when you're dealing with people who remind you of previous trauma. And I don't think everyone understands that every single Black person has those stories. Everyone, because it is so common for people to bully Black people. Like the whole country's doing it, essentially. If you look in the news and you see there's a shooting, what is the first question that everybody has? Like if there's a school shooting, we say, what happened to this child? How did we miss the warning signs? Oh, they were bullied for years. No one intervened. How did we miss this? Well, if you are constantly being bullied and made fun of almost by the whole country, how do you think that's going to play out? People feel so beaten on. And then you have all these interpersonal one on one negative experiences. I've had that happen to me several times where someone said, "Oh, but you're not really Black," and then proceeded to say something ridiculous like, "Oh, you're an Oreo," as though that's some kind of a compliment and not almost a slur. So I don't think people understand how much
Can you
trauma we're walking around with. I just wanted to mention how extremely, extremely common that is. So that's something that's good to communicate and put out there, that if people seem to you irrationally angry, you don't know how much trauma they have and how long it took for that to build up.
Mhm.
And that also, when someone is so angry and so heartbroken, the grief drives them mad. Like you mentioned earlier, hurt people do bizarre things that aren't rational. And
Right.
there's no justifying it when you're in a rational state. But you have to understand how extremely distressed people behave. And that's what we're seeing.
I was working with a relationship expert that's actually was doing the podcast, and I shared something about trauma and how things are traumatizing. And we talk about PTSD, and what I was sharing was that we looked at the what was happening to the people when they had these camps on the border, and these kids were getting separated from their family. And I remember so many of the people that were talking were saying how traumatizing it is to separate a child from their parents, to have them ripped from their parents and just going through such a traumatic experience. And they said these kids are going to need counseling. These kids are
Mm.
never going to they may never overcome what they've been through. And I said, well, when I looked at the story of the African American, I said, what type of trauma, over 400 years of trauma on top of trauma. And what she shared with me was something that I started to really internalize. And really, I'm starting to apply it to the people that I meet. And she said, when you're trying to fix trauma or deal with trauma, she said, number one, trauma must be validated. It should
Hmm.
not be minimized, and it has side effects. And so many people want to look at the what's going on right now, and what you're seeing is people who have been traumatized by when you George Floyd is a household name right now, but some Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Emmett Till, those are household names within the black household, the black community. But to the rest of the world, they're just finding out about these things. It doesn't do anything to grow or to develop the relationships and the dialogue when a person or a group of people have been traumatized by something, and then you put something, your confirmation bias, because you don't agree with the trauma, then your dialogue that you now, well, that's not really true because you can always find an example. I thought it was really an example of somehow that story or that narrative isn't true. And many people are posting. I have friends on both sides, and I try to keep my comments down the middle, but sometimes I can't be down the middle. I have to make a choice, and I am who I am. My life is what it is, but
Mhm.
I am one that believes that Black Lives Matter because when we went to, my sons told me that my wife and I are raising two black men, so I'm very emotional when it comes to this. And when my son said, "Dad, we want to go to the protest," he's 20, one's 20, one's 15, and I was I had a moment. I haven't even shared this with my wife. When I looked at my son holding up a sign, and his sign at the protest was "Stop killing us." My dad never saw me having to go through something like that, and it broke my heart to see this. But what breaks my heart even more is you when you hear and see people saying, for example, we're not saying, I don't believe that we should defund the police. I think that's a bad move. I think that would be unwise. But there's problems within the police department. But we try to pretend you want to put up pictures of all of the great police officers who don't believe the Black Lives Matter movement, or you show me a picture of a police officer that was killed in the line of duty, my heart breaks. My heart really does break, and it's terrible what's happening to the good police officers, but it doesn't erase what's been happening in the black community for 400 years. So when people do this, what it does is it pours vinegar inside an open wound
Yes.
because you fail to validate the trauma that we're saying. You've heard the old expression, don't whatever you say after the but doesn't it erases everything that was before it. So yeah, black lives matter, but all lives matter. What you've essentially said
Yeah.
was black lives don't matter. And a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah.
Um, you shouldn't minimize a person's experience. I don't know what it's like to be raped. I have no desire. But if you victimize and I hate to use that example because most of the people listening are women, and and yes, rape can happen to men. I admit that. But most of the victims of rape are women. But if I minimize it and try to turn the victim into the perpetrator, somehow say that, well, what were you wearing? Oh, you were drinking that night. Now her trauma has been just ripped wide open because
Yes.
I failed to at the bare minimum, I failed to validate it.
That is such a good point. The validation makes a huge difference. And now that there's more science around trauma, we're starting to see more and more how this is also a public health crisis. And people are always talking about the disparities in between marginalized groups and people who are part of the dominant social group here. We have all these differences in health outcomes, but people keep trying to attribute it to behavior. But now that we look at all the research about trauma and stress and how stress destroys the body on a molecular level, and one of the only ways that stress is processed and handled is when it's validated.
Absolutely.
And having access to therapy is so important, but there's so many people who don't have access to therapy. And it's funny when I essentially went to therapy for being Black. In hindsight, I realized that's what it was. I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know what all the low grade anxiety was about and all the low grade tension and just frustration was about. But unpacking it with someone who studies that, even though it was a white American therapist, just looking at the science, she could go through and validate experiences and explain this reaction that you're having. This is a human reaction. And if we did this to any group of people, this is most likely how they would respond. This is what the research shows. And you can even see in people who are descendants of people from war torn countries, you will see a difference in how a grandchild processes stress if their grandparent lived through the war. So if we're descendants of people who survived crimes against humanity that were traumatized to the max, it only makes sense that our ability to process stress, it's changed.
Right.
A lot of people go super numb. That's a coping mechanism. So we see that. So people are trying, a lot of very well-meaning people who haven't been on the wrong end of all this abuse and who are just like realizing, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is happening. They're trying to reach out, but some people are so numb, they can't be open to that right now. They can't make room for it. So we really need to think about this in terms of generational trauma, and then all the stress of COVID, which is just a new trauma, and the constant invalidation. So we see the victim blaming constantly when it comes to inordinate amounts of violence with police brutality. What did the child say? Or what did the young man say? What were they wearing? Were they dressed respectively? Were they in the wrong neighborhood? All these questions. You shouldn't have to be a perfect victim for people to be able to see that there's a problem.
Right.
And yet, as it stands, in most cases, you do have to be the perfect victim. And thankfully, because of video, people will see the perfect victim sometimes and say, oh, now I see a problem. I guess I can agree with that. But imagine how that compounds the damage of the initial bullying that you went through and the abuse. And then everyone telling you you're imagining it. Everyone was saying a few years ago, we're in a post-racial society. I don't even see color. Just that juxtaposition of everyone telling you everything's fine. And it's not.
Right. And a lot of times when people say, I don't see color, when you're a Black person and a white person says, I don't see color, I'm not speaking for all Black people, but most Black people hear that's not true. Because the first thing you see is color. Now, granted, what you're trying to say is, I don't judge based on color, and I understand what you're trying to say, but when you say, I don't see color, America was founded on the values that we're fighting against, or we're trying to overcome right now, and the understanding that we have to get through this we have to go through this trauma. Everybody wants to oftentimes they want peace. And what a lot of times, if you want a peaceful marriage, if you want peace in the Middle East, you want peace. What a lot of people don't realize is, in order to get peace, you've got to go through a war. They don't ever have a peace accord or a peace treaty when a peace treaty takes place between two warring factions. So if we really want peace, we're going to have to go through a war to get there. And it's a war that takes place individually in the hearts and the minds of people, but those people that are willing to stand up. And I don't want to paint a picture of doom and gloom, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There are things that people can do to stem the tide of systemic racial injustice. There are things that you can do on an individual and in a community, in a corporate or organizational level, and as a country. There are things that we can do, because it's not all doom and gloom. Neuroscientists do say that you can de-bias yourself, or you can de-bias an organization. And the primary thing that you need to do to start doing that is to begin the dialogue and start having the conversations. I thought it was, how do you tackle internal bias? I'm going to assume that if it's by internal bias, you're going to tackle internal bias as an individual internal bias, the best way for you to tackle internal bias is to start talking to people different than you, asking the questions, listen with your heart, not with your ears. Listen with your heart and see if is there some truth to it. And then be open and being willing to change. You've got to be willing. I appreciate that. We are the lights, Vanessa. We've got to be willing to embrace change, and it's on both sides. I'm not saying I don't want to go on any. I want to go on record and say that this is not a white issue. This is
Right.
a black issue. This is a human issue, and it's a human heart issue because you've got to be open and willing to change, but it starts off with dialogue. I thought it was fascinating. I was talking with my best friend earlier today, and I discovered something that when I put the post out there, it really was to start the dialogue. But when I look at a lot of what's going on, many people are that wanted to open up the dialogue, and I had some of the richest, oh my God, some of the richest conversation with white colleagues that I would have never had without us had this being in this crisis situation that made us have a real dialogue about some real substantive changes. And so I'm a much better person because of those conversations. And they asked questions, and we talked and heard each other's hearts. But there are many others that instead of instead of reaching out to have a dialogue, and it's a human thing, people tend to on social media. What I see, and I'll call it a phenomenon. They would rather, instead of talking to a black person, instead of talking to the white person that they work with and asking them, tell me about this thing that I don't understand. Please tell me about this Black Lives Matter. What does it mean? Case in point, Drew Brees, football player for the New Orleans Saints. I love Drew Brees. I'm not a fan of his, but I'm not a football fan, but of the person, he's always shown to be a straight up guy. And what he posted when everything started going sideways was he posted something saying he would never ever support kneeling for the national anthem because he thought it was disrespectful to veterans, and his grandfather was a veteran, and so on and so forth. And there was a tremendous backlash against him from people from all over. They're burning jerseys and all of that. I still held out some reservation because I realized that didn't line up with what I thought Drew. I don't know him personally, but that's what I didn't line up with what I thought Drew Brees, who he was. A couple days later, he posted something and said, "Hey, I've talked to some friends of mine. Now I get it." And he posted that and said, "I get it." I can honor that willingness to change, but I have some people that are friends and family that say, "I don't believe Drew Brees. I'm not going to accept his apology." But my retort back to them is, well, what do you want? You want people to change their minds. He changed his mind, but then you say, "I don't believe it." You've got to be willing to open up the dialogue. But the key to this was he went to, I think it was Shannon Sharpe. He went to somebody he knew and trusted on the other side and asked them the question. But the phenomenon that I see happening in social media is, take this for example. I believe that Black Lives Matter and that there are some bad actors, bad cops out there that are terrible, that need to go. They are racist, members of the Klan, yada, 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 all of those stereotypes. So I go and find a post of a white police officer that believes what I believe and says the exact same things that I believe, instead of going to the white officer right down the street that lives in my neighborhood that I can say, "Hey man, can I have an honest conversation with you about what's really going on?" I find that there are a lot of people, a lot of white people will go and find the most obscure example of one black person that says the one thing that agrees with what their position, when 99.9% of the rest of the black population doesn't believe that. So there's no black monolith. I don't speak for all black men. I don't speak for all black people. I'm a 54-year-old black man, handsome as well, but I grew up in upstate New York. I went to an all-black church. My high school was predominantly Italian, like 60% Italian. And So, but my family is predominantly black. My workspace is predominantly white, and it always has been. So I've had a bunch of different experiences that lead me to who I am. So my opinion is 100% right to me, but I don't speak for all black people. But if you want to know what I'm thinking, if you want to know, if you have a confusion about something that's intrinsic in the black culture, what is it about this, I don't know, rap music, hip hop? I'm from New York. I love hip hop. But what is it? Ask somebody about it instead of standing on the outside judging it. I've heard so many people tell me I can't stand rap music. And if I ask you, name one rap artist or name one rap song, you would say, I don't know no rap artists, I don't know rap songs, because I've had some black people say, I can't stand country music. If you listen to a country music singer, they are just a half a hair from a soulful R&B singer, the way that many of those country and western singers are. So, but ask the people. We're more willing to go pull up a post of some total stranger than to go in the cubicle next to us and ask somebody that's right there that we have immediate access to. And that's where we have to, if we really want to start to change and start changing ourselves, changing our organizations, that's one of the main places that we can start, is it starts with us.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't see many questions. We've had so much great participation. I think that's a great point, that we need to remember in this industry. I feel like we are family, but it's dysfunctional when there's an issue in a family and everybody knows about it and nobody's saying anything about it. So you leave people to their imaginations to imagine what you really think about the issue. And I know some people are afraid of saying the wrong thing right now, but I like your advice that if we could all stay open, because communication is so, so important right now.
Right.
For us to continue being functional as organizations, for us not to become a dysfunctional family, we need to open those lines of communication up and be patient and really listen with a view to understanding. Listen, trying to understand the other person, remembering you don't have the same experiences going into the situation. And if you make any assumptions, are you really going to achieve communication?
Absolutely.
But we also need to give people room for their grief and to know that some people not everybody has the emotional energy right now to have that conversation with you, but there are people out there who do and who want to. And so let's just remember that we're all family, and a lot of the families in a lot of emotional trouble right now. And like you said, we're not a monolith. My experience is completely different. Like, my church life was growing up majority white. My husband's white. My family lives down south. And so most of my family around me is white. So it's a very different experience. And at the same time, I feel like when you understand or you assume that somebody cares about you or sees you in a positive light, you assume positive things about them when they say things you don't agree with. You think, well, there might be a reason they believe that. So, like, if you say something I don't agree with, I think, well, maybe he's had a different experience. I don't immediately think, he's awful. So we need to be aware of that tendency in ourselves to not give people an inch. And like you said, people can't undo mistakes they've made in the past. To expect people to be able to do that, it's not possible. So what's our real goal here? We want to move forward. And there is hope. And I am very encouraged by how many people have participated today. I love Jeremy. I was about to post something from Jeremy and Vanessa. I'm still trying to get them to sing together. I'm obsessed with this. I'm like a broken record with this. I just feel like they're such a powerful duo when they present together, and they're both singers and they both are preachers' kids. They just need to be singing together. So please, somebody pressure them, because they're not listening to me. Thank you, Joanne, for participating. We appreciate everybody. There were people earlier that I didn't catch because the comments were going too fast. Thank you, Susan. Then I didn't want to post their comments out of context. And this is an old comment.
I want to share one last thing before they go, because I don't want to end on a negative, because I think it's really important when you talk about these heavy topics that you have to really end on a positive note, and a positive note of truth. But what do you do about it, about creating a more diverse culture, or a more diverse organization, or to yourself to be more diverse? I got four steps, or four key points that you can employ. The first one is exposure. You got to expose yourself to someone outside of your current life, your current sphere of influence. Expose yourself to something different. The second is dialogue. You've got to be able to dialogue with people who are different from you. And dialogue isn't you doing all the talking. Dialogue is a two-way street. I had some people during this recent process, I had so many, when I told you I had some rich conversations, but I have a conversation, I told her, I said, look, all those questions that you always wanted to ask a Black person, but you didn't feel like it was appropriate, ask it. And right now the door is open. It's a two-way street. And I always wanted to ask the question about a mayonnaise sandwich. So I got to ask her about it. Can you explain the mayonnaise sandwich to me? New York Black people didn't eat mayonnaise sandwich. So the dialogue. The third one is inclusion. Don't always just do things within your group, but include different people. I know you're talking to different people and you're exposing yourself to different people, but include them. That means to value what differences they bring to the group and include it in how you lead as an organization. Include different perspectives on it, because if everybody thinks alike, then most of you are not necessary. And the fourth one is honesty. There's a acronym for what you think before you speak, and the T is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? The first part of it is it true. Be honest, first of all, with yourself, and be honest with other people. It takes a lot of courage to be honest and tell somebody you don't like something that they did. But get past the emotion and get to the place of being honest. Just honesty is, they say honesty is the best policy, but if you do those four things, your organization or you as an individual can really start making and growing by leaps and bounds in the area of being less biased and more diverse, and maybe taking some of the blind spots out. So number one, exposure. 2, dialogue. 3 is inclusion, and 4 is honesty. And those are just 4 quick steps that we can employ to try to be better as an organization and as an individual. So I know that we're kind of wrapping up, and I don't want to go on too long, but I did want to share that before we got out of here.
That is perfect. Thank you for ending on a positive note. I do think we have to get comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations. And like you said, it's like a war within ourselves to get bias out of our hearts. And like you mentioned earlier, this isn't targeted at one group of people. This is a human tendency. We all have areas we need to work on. Someone called me out on every time someone says something about their doctor, I assume that they're male. And how pitiful is that? Like, that's a bias that doesn't even work in my favor, but that is something that the human mind does as well. So if I'm not exempt from misogyny, then hello, this can happen to anybody. So don't feel bad if you've made mistakes. We're just going to move forward, and it's all love. What we really are wanting is just to be family and to be on the same page with all members of our school nutrition family, our human family, our American family. This is about moving forward in a positive way so everyone feels included and celebrated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, everyone. I've included in the banner the website where you can download a guide on how you can identify biases in your organization. And I want to remind everyone, of course, I have to do a plug for my show as well, that I will be playing this as just an audio podcast as well. I have new episodes every week. I'm always talking to interesting people like our guest today in their area of expertise. I have Marlon and Amanda on the show tomorrow. Tomorrow's Thursday. Yes, shows are every Thursday. On summer hours, I never know what day it is. But yeah, I hope you will join me. You can listen on Spotify, on iTunes, wherever. You can just go to the website, schoolnutritionrd.com, and listen straight from there. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I'm sorry if I overlooked you. There were moments where the comments were rolling pretty quickly, but we appreciate all of you so much. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us after the broadcast. All right. Bye, everybody.